Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our adventure in the Cold Bog with the Cult of Jingz. Last time we left off after what can very well be called a show of dominance. Now that we have allowed ourselves to use guns, fights have definitely been a little bit easier. And as we watched Took the Cook make some psychite tea from the psychoid leaves that are about to go bad, I quickly want to mention two things before we really get going. First of all, the frequency of videos on this channel will likely be reduced a bit for the foreseeable future, with the unfortunate reason being my mental health, or rather the current lack thereof. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but I've talked more about it in my latest channel update video, which you can find linked on screen and down below. Secondly, as you've likely heard, a new Rimworld expansion was just announced, and much like many of you, I am eagerly waiting for Rimworld Biotech. And in light of this announcement, as well as the upcoming 1.4 patch, I think it might be a good idea to watch this video all the way to the end, where I talk a bit more about what this new expansion could mean for the future of this series. For now though, onto the action at hand, and we start things off with the latest addition to Liviana, our slave Rabola. Craftsman Armando has just finished a slave body strap and slave collar, both items designed to suppress slaves. Suppression basically means how much power we have over our slaves, and with these two pieces of gear we can ensure that the value stays high. Normally the suppression value would gradually fall down over time, which then in turn would make Rabola more and more likely to rebel, but again, with the right equipment we can prevent that, or at least reduce the frequency. So for now, she's chopping stone chunks as we watch a beautiful morning in Liviana pass by. As you can see, food is definitely not an issue right now, our Garandland trees are also well maintained. In other words, life in the Cold Bog is good for now. So, time for Armando to receive his third ritual scar. I believe he is one of the few who does not have a single eye scar yet, although before we can see where Regini places number 3, Kevin goes on an insulting spree. Yes, despite being in the last stages of his addiction, he does suffer another mental break, and this is one of those where I don't think it's necessary to imprison him, but at the same time, due to the insults piling up, Maniac's mood will quickly suffer. In our tree temple, meanwhile, Armando gets away with a scar on his leg, and so his eyes are in fact completely unharmed. During the evening's meditation session, meanwhile, Kevin continues to hurl insults at Maniac, and so our leading combat specialist quickly assembles a -26 mood penalty. Randy then also sends a quest our way that I think we will swiftly decline. No, I don't think that the Cult of Jingz is ready to deal with 70 mercenary snipers, not to mention 2 groups of them. And after declining the quest, Randy seems to also learn his lesson. He now blesses us with a Garandland pot sprout, although we are not actually going to plant that just yet. I do have Chutney in mind for this one, who apart from shooting things does not really have any major role in our colony. On the following morning then we see the delayed effects of Kevin's insulting spree. The mood penalties have remained overnight and have now driven Maniac into a tantrum. Luckily though, he will only destroy one of our Muffalo corpses, and we do have enough of those, so we'll let him do that as a quick way to blow off some steam. And I would say it's a good thing that we did, because just a few seconds later Liviana is once again under attack. And yes, I think we have reached that point where the 500% threat scale really starts coming into play. In any case, 138 traps people are about to attack immediately. Now, they are all exclusively melee enemies, so we've got that going for us. Still, especially since 2 of our combat specialists have not yet returned from their caravan trip, I don't really feel like taking our chances. So instead we'll do something here that I've wanted to do for quite some time. We are setting up defensive positions with most of our colonists, and then we are sending out Specs a good distance away from them. What I plan to do here is to use Specs' neuroquake psycast, which has a small safe zone around the caster, but then drives everyone in its effect radius berserk. It also has a 12-second casting time and will send Specs into a psychic coma for 5 days, not to mention that using it will cause relationship penalties with every single faction on the planet. So this is definitely something you don't want to or really cannot use too often. However, today we are going to have some fun with it. And there we go, Specs collapses, we see a bunch of relationship penalties with different factions, and I'm pretty sure that all but just a handful of enemies have been affected. So while they now maul themselves to death, we can give our people some target practice, and a few seconds later then the remaining survivors decide to flee. However, most of them are still in their berserk state, so they will first prioritize punching their heads in, all the while we sit back and enjoy the carnage. Now, quick change here, you may have noticed that the bar at the bottom of the screen has shifted, as I have briefly exited the game to install the numbers mod. What this does is it gives us a handy overview of the 39 survivors, so that we don't have to go through every single one of them manually to look for interesting skills or traits. Now, you can set up this mod in a bunch of different ways. What I've done here is created a preset that allows me to look for melee specialists and also for pawns with very high psychic sensitivity. And not only do we have a psychically hypersensitive pawn here that would make for a very powerful psycaster, but we also have a few very capable melee fighters here, one even with the brawler and the tough trait. However, I think we will prioritize that psycaster candidate, and in order to ensure that we can capture them, we are actually going to use one charge of Tuk's psychic shock lance. This prevents them from seeking out any more potentially deadly fights, but in this case also did some brain damage. However, for a dedicated psycaster, that is actually not so bad, as a higher pain level will result in a faster neural heat recovery. As you can see, our tough brawler did in fact also survive, so our Leafheart Kevin will now patch them up right here now to avoid them bleeding out, while we also notice that Redini has apparently come under attack rescuing Specs. It looks like our neuroquake did turn a local squirrel manhunter as well, although that should not be a match for our tree speaker. A Muffalo then also turns Manhunter after being attacked by one of the Berserker tribalists, but again, unless we forget about it, this should not be an issue. At this point then, we also finally receive the Arconexus quest, which is actually the quest line for the new ending that was introduced in the Ideology DLC. To get to that ending, we need to collect all 3 pieces of the Arconexus map. However, in exchange for one of those pieces, we need to sell off our entire colony. And not only that, we can only sell it if it has reached a total value of over 350,000 silver, which in our case is still pretty far away. So for the moment, let's make sure that the manhunting Muffalo does not cause any problems, and then we can quickly jump over to our prison, where you can see we have captured 3 people, 2 capable melee fighters alongside the aforementioned potential psycaster. Prisoner number 4 was already captured in the last episode, and will likely remain in here for just a little while longer, at least until one of the others has made a full recovery. By the way, at some point during the fight, Kevin has actually also successfully overcome his smoke leaf addiction, so he now no longer has the smoke leaf need and will also no longer receive a mood penalty for not smoking. To kind of make up for that, the neuroquake also comes with a mood penalty of -12 for a whopping 10 days, so that's one more reason why we should not use this too frequently, although I'm not entirely sure if the penalties from multiple neuroquakes do in fact stack. In any case, in the afternoon our caravan of Chutney, Donut and Squix returns, of course accompanied by their Muffalos and Grizzly Bears, who have all made a full recovery. Among the things they brought back from that trip are also 42 units of Luciferium, which would actually be enough to sustain a single pawn for 280 days or a little more than 4.5 in-game years. Benefits would be the removal of 1 random scar, injury or illness every 15 to 30 in-game days, as well as improvements to various stats such as sight, consciousness or movement speed. The big downside, on the other hand, would be a permanent Luciferium addiction, and if we don't find more to satisfy the pawn's needs, they will inevitably die. So this could definitely be useful if someone picks up a bad permanent injury or illness, but it definitely also comes with a substantial price tag, so maybe let me know in the comments what you think about using it. This is definitely a high risk, high reward sort of thing. In the evening then, one of our prisoners gets sick with an infection, but Kevin is already on his way with some proper medicine, and just in that moment our guest Raven starts hunting him, as the neuroquake echo has driven her into a mental break. So another insulting spree it is, which will definitely not help the mood of our Leafheart. At least the medical work is done for today though. As Kevin then goes to sleep, Raven switches targets and focuses on Chutney, whose mood is not exactly high to begin with, so we'll have to see how this goes. In the middle of the night then, our prisoner from the last episode suffers a crisis of belief, and so they have now decided to convert to the Cult of Jingz, all without Redini getting involved. On the next morning it's time to butcher the remaining 2 thrombos, and with a bunch of thrombo fur and meat coming in, the day looks to be a productive one, at least until we are attacked once again. This time our tribal enemies have split up into 2 groups, a grand total of 94 melee units to the south and 82 to the northeast. Now unfortunately this time Specs is not here to help out with this, but at least we have Chutney, Donut and Squeaks back. And I think the best course of action here is to be proactive to avoid both groups hitting us at once, and for this one we are actually going to put on some heavy armor, at least on our melee specialists Thoraya and Redini. Meanwhile, the rest of our colony takes a position near one of our southern gates. I think with an enemy group this large we need to make use of that choke point, and we also need to have our main group a little bit closer for all of this to work. If things go as planned, however, then they will not actually have that much to do, as our enemies will once again hopefully more or less defeat themselves. To achieve that, we can now use Freya's excessively large pool of neural heat, which first allows us to use the skip psycast to teleport her into range, then we can use berserk pulse on the largest group of enemies possible, and as soon as the ability hits we can skip back out. Now as you can see, we cut it a little bit close here and Freya did get stabbed. Ideally we do of course avoid that. Still, the result is the same. Our enemies are now once again going to town on each other, while we quickly extract a tree to clear a defensive position for our heavily armored tree speaker Redini. 16 of our enemies then lie dead as Freya once again sneaks up on the group. In total, we need to be able to spend 115 neural heat for the 3 psycasts, and thankfully Freya does have a pretty fast cooldown, which is now actually sped up further by the fact that she is injured. Once again then, we get in and get out without much trouble, and our enemies continue to fight amongst themselves, although shortly after, with 29 dead, they finally start their attack. But, as you can see, we are already prepared for that with a lovely choke point here. In a salvaged suit of marine armor, Thoraya stands her ground in the middle, while Redini and Chutney flank her and overwhelm every single attacker 3-1. The rest of our colonists are then firing into the enemies from the back, and we even have Freya to launch another berserk pulse if it is necessary, although with our claw dryads and grizzly bears also eager to join the fight, I don't think it will. And indeed, there we go, that is the first group driven off. We have about 50 or so survivors, although not all of them on their feet. The second group meanwhile has already begun their attack as well, but since they are not breachers, they will go for the opening by the river, so we should have a bit of time until they arrive. And we'll use that time to once again set up our defense line. With Freya we unfortunately only have one single charge of berserk pulse left, so this is likely going to get a little bit more messy than the first group. Here they come then, and I kind of had hoped to be able to sneak in that berserk pulse with Freya from the side. However, our enemies are just drawn out a little bit too wide for that to make sense, so instead we just release her claw dryads and then retreat. As you can see then, the fight is quickly evolving into an all-out brawl, and Jekna has already gone down, and if I recall correctly, this is also not the first time she does, so perhaps we should keep her off of the front lines in the future. Meanwhile, we were able to get off that last berserk pulse after all, causing at least a bit of mayhem, although again, as you can clearly see, this is getting messy. Suddenly then, we have good news and we have bad news. The good news, with their numbers cut in half, our enemies are now fleeing. The bad, Grizzly Bear Dr. Thunder has sadly not survived. So sadly, we lose one of our venerated animals as the attackers decide to flee, for some reason straight through our base, only to smash up the eastern gate and escape. While they do, we immediately cease fire and instead prioritize the rescue of all bears and dryads. We have quite a few of them currently bleeding out, and at least the dryads are quickly back up on their feet, so they can now head back into the base and enter their healing pods to make a full recovery. Unfortunately, our heavily armored Redini then also suffers a mental break. She's now wandering around in a daze, not only abandoning her medical duties, but we will also not be able to take the armor off of her until she calms down again. By the way, if you want to know what all of this has done to our colony wealth, then well, at the moment we are at about 200,000 silver, a rather steep rise from the around 115,000 or so that we had just a few moments ago. Now, most of this is of course caused by all of the dead enemies and their equipment, and as soon as their bodies start to rot, that value will drop down again. For now, it remains a bit of a danger though, as raids of course scale with wealth, and the size of the second one may have already been influenced by the first one. Still, our colony wealth is about to drop down a little bit though, because the shuttle for our guest Raven has just arrived. Now, Raven stayed with us for a grand total of 19 days. She didn't really contribute all that much, to be honest, but during that time we did keep her happy enough to now earn our reward of 5 glitter world medicine. Now, during her time in Liviana, Raven and Tuk have also become lovers, and I have thought about whether or not we might actually be able to keep her here, but that would require imprisonment and therefore anger her faction, and I also think that I've come up with an alternative solution that fits the Cult of Jingz quite well. Before we get to that though, we have another quest pop up, and I would like to hear what you think about this, as the Empire wants to send 91 man-hunting panthers our way. They would also give us 9 Imperial soldiers to help fighting them, and this would be a good way to obtain some Eltex gear for our psycasters, not to mention that our relationship with the Empire could also benefit from a goodwill boost, as they have of course not taken too kindly to our neuroquake. Still, 91 panthers should not be taken lightly, so again, let me know what you think about accepting this. With her construction skill of 6, Squeaks then digs a grave in the evening. It is now time to bury Dr. Thunder, while Kevin and Robola take care of the surviving grizzly bears. The following mental break for Squeaks is then actually somewhat understandable, even though it was caused by being outdoors for too long, as Squeaks also has the undergrounder trait. As a result, she will now go on an ambrosia binge, and I think we'll let her. We could definitely use the mood bonus from Catharsis, and the chances of her becoming addicted are relatively small. Shortly after, we also have some visitors with items to trade, and in the middle of the night then, most of our colonists are finally patched up. And also in the middle of the night, our slave Robola goes on a sadistic rage. Yes, that neuroquake has definitely messed with the mood in the Cult of Jingz, but considering that the alternative could have very well been a bunch of dead colonists, I think we'll gladly take it. Of course, we will not let Robola harm anyone, but first it is time for Tuk to say goodbye to Raven, who now enters the shuttle and heads back home. The Glitter World medicine is dropped immediately, and thankfully Robola is already pacified by our prisoners, although Kevin still imprisons her afterwards. While he once again tends to the wounded, we also have another mental break to report, this time on Chutney, who now joins Redini, wandering around dazed and confused. So that's our colony leader in a psychic coma, 3 people on mental breaks and 2 down from their injuries. Yes, I think it's safe to say that the Cult of Jingz has seen better days. And those who can still walk are mostly busy feeding the bedridden, or in Kevin's case doing some trade with our visitors. As you can see though, it's not much, mostly because the trader does not have much silver, and so we watch a rainy day in the Cold Bog go on as our colony is slowly recovering. Around noon then, Freya takes care of something that is perhaps a bit unusual. She is chopping down Spex's old Gauranland tree. All these episodes I could not really shake the feeling that the tree and the moss around it were kind of blocking the anima tree, and we are no longer using it anyway, so it might as well go. Now, this does cause a pretty nasty mood penalty of -15 for 10 days for Specs. However, she will also be in a coma for about half of that and therefore safe from mental breaks, so I think this here might be the best time to do this. The next few hours remain uneventful until we have cargo pods drop down in the early afternoon, inside a few doses of wake-up that we'll gladly haul back, and this also serves as a nice reminder that Spex's charge rifle is still out here. In the early evening then we can see everyone but Specs is already back up on their feet, and Squix's mental break has also come to an end, and overall the mood in Liviana seems to be improving slowly but steadily. As one of our prisoners then suffers a crisis of faith, we get one step closer to recruiting another believer, although Jekna is immediately following that up with a food binge mental break. Well, if there's one thing we have enough of at the moment, it's food, and there might be more to come. After all, the timer on that 91 Panther quest is ticking down. And because I would like to hear what you think about it before making a decision, I would say let's make the cut at this point, or at least transition over to the fan art section and talk a bit more about the upcoming biotech expansion. Now, I think it goes without saying that I would like to play Rimworld Biotech on this channel, although I've not yet been able to think of a good way to incorporate the expansion into this existing series. To be honest, I'm not even sure if that is a feasible option in the first place. If I recall correctly, at least for Ideology, it was recommended to start a fresh save file. Overall, I don't think that we absolutely have to play with it the second it comes out. As with Ideology, I am perfectly happy to wait a bit, but considering what is necessary to obtain all 3 pieces of the Arconexus map and unlock the new Ideology ending, I have a feeling that waiting for this playthrough to come to its natural end would be a little bit too long. So if you guys have any smart ideas of how we could potentially incorporate biotech into an existing playthrough, then I'm all ears. I would also not be opposed to use the magic of console commands if it should be necessary. I definitely think that the fact that we have turned off mechanoids for this playthrough could become a little bit of an issue. Most of this is of course speculation at this point, as biotech is of course not out yet, but I think this time around we have the opportunity to jump on it early, and if possible I would like to do that. Ideally, we do of course find that point that marks a bit of a break in the action, and perhaps finding that first Arconexus map and moving to a new settlement could be that point. Once again though, you are all invited to share what you guys would like to see. And with that being said, let's make the cut for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.